All right, welcome back, everyone, to another enlightening episode of the All Me podcast. So, over the past year or so, we've gotten a lot of questions from high school girls about bodybuilding and the fitness industry and some of the drugs that are associated with that. And in fact, in episode 123, we had the privilege of interviewing Stephanie Hammermeister about her path in the bodybuilding and fitness world. So, please be sure to tune into some of that. But today, I want to dive into the world of Clenbuterol and Anavar with Dr. Appelhans, who is an expert in this field, but is also a fitness competitor herself. So it was really important for us to find somebody that was knowledgeable, and that's a female that could share this information with us. So I don't think there's a better guest that we could have today. So Dr. Kristy Appelhans, welcome to the All Me podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I think we were just talking about the fact that I could talk about this all week. So I'm excited to dive into the subject with you. Thanks.
Well, really good. So let's kind of start just with the whole fitness thing together, because you're just coming off a competition. I've been following you on Instagram. It's very inspiring to watch if anybody's ever followed somebody that's, prepped for a competition. So kind of talk about what got you interested in fitness, and then we'll talk about your recent competition.
It's so long ago, to articulate what actually started it all. I might be a little clumsy on that one, but growing up, I had a lot of healthy influences, especially female influences that were healthy. My mom has always been very healthy, fit, active, ate nutritiously. And even my grandmothers, for that time, they were very progressive in that sense, but they also came from a time that you just never sat still. Like if you were sitting still, you needed something to do. That was just kind of the mentality in our family and for the time. So it always just kind of inspired me to pursue that. And I obviously saw that they aged more gracefully as a result, of being healthy. And that was very enticing to me. They're all beautiful women, of course, inside and out, that extra benefit, I certainly appreciated even as a young person. But what really kind of catapulted me, because they never got into fitness competing or bodybuilding or anything like that.
Takes a very special person. Yeah.
It's kind of someone that lacks a little bit of sanity at times.
Uh-huh.
To keep with
Very
it.
true.
But I would say I was in my early 20s. And at that time, I'm showing my age now, but at that time, these competitions and fitness was still on ESPN. So you could tune in fitness and bodybuilding competitions on television. And, that's very glamorous. That's very impressionable for young people. But women coming onto the scene when I was watching it, they were very feminine. They were very attractive. They looked great. And as far as you could tell, they were the pinnacle of health. Right. So when I started seeing that, I not only wanted to look like that, but I thought, hey, this is where I need to be. This is the bar I need to set for myself to be at optimum or peak, health for myself. So I just set that standard early, even if it was a bit skewed from from what I really needed to do to be healthy. I just kind of gravitated towards the lifestyle. And then, as I pursued nutrition, in my undergraduate education, and then went into medicine and lifestyle, as a focus in medicine. So it just kind of all made sense to me.
I love it. It's like your parents tell you, and you hear this from all sorts of folks in the business world, just the world in general. If you do something you love and you're passionate about it, it's not really work.
Right.
And you can just tell just in our early conversations and everything, Lisa told me about you. I was like, you love what you do. And then following you on social media, you're obviously very passionate about what you do, and you share your expertise and your knowledge. So I was kind of following you as you were doing your prep leading up to Thanksgiving. So I guess you were probably really glad it took place right before Thanksgiving so that you could eat and enjoy. Talk about what it was like. I mean, are you going to continue doing some of these competitions? What makes you decide, okay, I want to do this, I'm going to stick to it. And how long does the training take?
Wow. And that is a topic in and of itself, but I'll try to be concise here. First of all, training for a show, as long as I've been doing, which is more than 20 years now, it's a long time. So I've learned a lot. I train and eat smarter rather than more stringent now than I ever have. Not to mention my needs as a competitor, as a aging competitor, should I say that, are different than they were in my 20s,
Okay.
So So it's strict diet, but it's a gradual approach to the prep season. You try to maintain a certain weight and lifestyle throughout the year so that you're not trying to drop 20, 30 pounds,
Yeah.
before you hit the stage. That's extremely hard on the body. It's not the smart thing to do. And as far as maintaining results, you're not likely to maintain them with those kinds of habits, right?
Yeah.
Preparation for me is about 12 weeks, when I
Yeah.
start getting really serious and cleaning everything up, going into a bit of a calorie deficit and increasing my training. Well, I wouldn't say increasing, it's always intense, but it's just a little bit different. So increasing volume rather than focusing on, strength goals, unlike I might, when I'm in my off season, becomes more prevalent as I get closer to the show because I'm looking for more calorie output, so volume is a good way to do that, through exercise, but also decreasing calories is a good way to do that. So it's a very careful balance between the two, that you would preserve muscle, but also create such a deficit that you could lose body fat, and
Okay.
that's what us natural competitors have to do. We have
Yeah.
to leverage diet and exercise. It's not as exciting or sexy as people might,
Yeah.
but it is necessary, for most people to be able to achieve those extremely lean, especially for women, results that they look for in competition.
So we got, I guess the burning question is, do you ever cheat? So you got 12 weeks, right? Okay. Okay. So but what about as you're getting like closer? So let's say you're like a week out or days out. Do you ever just like, okay, I got to have a piece of chocolate, or maybe I'm going to overindulge? Like, so you do that.
For sure. It's all
Okay.
about balance. And like I said,
Yeah.
you've been at it as long as I have, and I have the advantage of being a scientist and a
Yeah.
doctor as well. I can tell where those cheats are going to be catastrophic and where they're going to be totally
Interesting.
within my balance that I need to achieve to.
So, I know in talking with Stephanie Hammermeister, she was talking about how she had a coach and they would help her along the way, and, sending, we talked about how she would send them photos hourly, as we got closer to competition. But with you, and your education and expertise, do you have a coach, or are you able to handle everything yourself?
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, to reach the goals that I had for myself, which, we didn't quite touch on this, earlier yet, but competition is very subjective. So I would say one thing that took me a long time to achieve is a mindset that I'm only competing with me, right? There are
Yep.
certain
Okay.
criteria that I want to come in with to be competitive on the stage, and certainly to the judges. But that's a moving goalpost, right? So
Mm.
you need to set and achieve goals that, you can control, right? So
Mm.
we just need to put that out there.
Yeah.
But no, I didn't think, for those purposes that I needed a coach for
Okay.
most of the years. Now, a few years back, I decided to just try a coach, and actually I tried a coaching team, a husband and wife team that are very prominent in the field, and they're very educated. Oh, I grilled them extensively to make sure they were qualified. That sounds conceited, but I wanted to make sure
Well, yeah, but a lot of people don't know.
I didn't want bro science. In other words,
Yes.
I wanted
Yes.
people that were educated in this
Yep.
space that could give me something that I couldn't offer myself. And
Okay.
they were wonderful, right? And I did achieve some improvements that I hadn't seen in previous years. So I took that forward. But once I learned those things, I know those things. So I don't necessarily need to go back. That's not to say I never would enlist a
Yep.
coach's help again. But again, it's very limited for me because I have such a great resource to pull from in my own education and experience.
Yeah, I was asking a friend of mine. She's an athletic trainer, and she had rolled her ankle or did something like that. And I said, "Well, do you take care of yourself? Can you take your own ankle up?" And she's like, "It's funny. Nobody's really ever asked that." But she's like, "Yeah, actually, I mean, obviously, a lot of it you want medical attention for, but
Yeah.
being able to self treat definitely helps." So you're a naturopathic doctor. I think I pronounced that correct. I
Yeah.
hope I did. So for us lay people, can you talk about what that is and the patients you see and sort of what you do?
Well, the word naturopathic or naturopathic doctor has far more mystery than it deserves.
Okay.
A naturopathic doctor, they assess patients and they diagnose patients much like any other doctor would. I would say the key difference is that we have a broader allowance for diagnostic approach and for treatment approach than your, what is called conventional doctors would, like MDs or DOs, right?
Okay.
So we just give our patients more options. And at the end of the day, we're looking for the cause of a disease or a condition rather than just patching the symptoms or alleviating symptoms, right? So
Okay.
we're looking at all kinds of different factors that can impact why a person may develop a disease. That could be their environment, that could be their diet, it could be their physical activity or sedentary lifestyle. It could be their mental emotional state, that's impacting their health. And we all know what stress does,
Oh, yeah.
to the body, or at least we know a little bit about that, right? So we just offer them more options and we treat them
Okay.
more holistically. And, the term that's being thrown around nowadays is functional medicine. So essentially we are functional medicine doctors because we're treating a root cause of disease. We're identifying and treating that root cause of disease. So it's really just a holistic approach, allowing our patient more options in treatment, but also looking further, broader, more comprehensively into what may be causing their condition to begin with. And with this, one of the most important aspects of being a naturopathic doctor is we have certain standards and philosophies. Of course, we all are committed to first doing no harm to our patients. Any doctor would commit to that standard, but we also commit to what's called doctor as teacher, right?
Yeah.
So we are giving our patients education so that they can continue implementing things in their life to advocate for their own health, to live a healthy lifestyle. And they're not like dependent on us,
Yeah.
for the long term. Certainly want them to come and not self-diagnose and self-treat, if they really have something going awry. But, they have tools. They have tools for
Yeah.
maintaining a healthy lifestyle. And that's not necessarily common to the more conventional medical setting. So that's a true differentiator for us as well.
So are you seeing patients like in a hospital type setting? You guys have just, like a separate office where they're calling, scheduling appointments?
I have a private practice. I've
Okay.
had that for 17 years, and I had some clinical experience in other private practices before. In fact, I started out treating athletes, professional athletes, and TV personalities. So they would come in for very specialized treatment and other interventions that would help them excel in the athletic community or, as a TV personality and looking and feeling great. But yeah, I treat all kinds of different medical conditions or health interests that people have, and I do it privately. I'm
Okay.
a sole practitioner, so, that's mostly for selfish reasons.
Yeah.
My
But it's nicer from a patient too. You're not, well, hey, I'm going to see Dr. Kristy today, or, I might see her assistant or somebody else. They know they're coming to see you, which
Right.
from a patient's, it's more personal, it's more comfortable.
Exactly. And I really customize that interaction with each and every patient. And who knows, I may not be able to maintain that for the long term, but I really enjoy being able to do that, for the majority of my career, because what I see is better results. You have better communication, you have more personalization, you have more transparency, you're able to help control those outcomes better. And I just see better, clinical outcomes as a result.
Interesting. So I want to kind of, pick your brain on some of this expertise and the knowledge that you have, about just some of the drugs being used by females within this fitness and bodybuilding world. And we kind of touched on it in episode 123 with Stephanie Hammermeister. And this is an important topic because for whatever reason, I don't know if it's social media influencers or what, but we're getting questions from high school girls like, hey, are you familiar with Anavar or Clenbuterol? And, I've heard of these drugs. I'm familiar with these drugs. In fact, I went one night and laid in bed and my wife was just working on her computer. She's in real estate and our kids were sleeping. We're going to sleep. And I remember just searching like Anavar females and Clenbuterol females. And obviously the videos and pictures that come up, my wife's looking around like, what are you watching? I was like, it's research and development, number one.
Yeah.
Right. I'm trying to understand, why these girls are asking this. And you can go into some rabbit holes on YouTube.
Yeah.
Everybody's got their own opinion and the dosing of the drug and the safety and efficacy and all that sort of stuff. So what I wanted to kind of do with you today is really break these drugs down. Like, why would somebody use them as a doctor? Like, let's start first. Let's just start with Clenbuterol. right? So like, why would a doctor prescribe this? Like, what does it do? I mean, would I ever need to walk in, or, from a female's perspective, would she ever need to be able to walk into, her primary care physician? Would they offer her clenbuterol? Let's I guess kind of just start there in general, clenbuterol and what it is, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so clenbuterol is actually, well, first of all, it's not used in the US. It's typically prescribed outside the US. US FDA hasn't approved it for use in general medical settings. In the US, you might find it used in veterinary medicine. And because of its potency and its type of action, and I'll talk about that in a minute, is typically used for horses. So it's a very potent drug, and
Big
it
animal.
is for respiratory illnesses, right? Because it's a
Sure.
bronchodilator, right? So think asthma, COPD,
Yeah.
or other respiratory illnesses, serious respiratory illnesses is what clenbuterol would be used for. So
Okay.
from you might be wondering, well, from an athletic perspective, why would
Yeah.
someone want that? If they're not asthmatic or they're not a chronic smoker or they don't have emphysema. Well, when you increase bronchodilation, you also increase oxygenation,
Okay.
right? And so the more oxygen that can go to working or recovering muscles, and more circulatory activity, more nutrients, the better your recovery, the better your performance while you're working out, you can increase stamina. So as a more indirect effect, you can certainly enhance, your ability to grow and maintain muscle, as a result, because those muscles are just being better nourished than they would if you're
Okay.
not receiving a drug like this. Now, really, cleanse or
Yep. That's like the street term that I'm sure they might be hearing, sort of like Tren or
yeah,
Trenbolone, right? So yeah.
exactly. So clen is also especially potent in lipolysis, and when you experience lipolysis, that's when you burn fat for energy. So fat loss is the
Yeah.
huge draw for this drug, even more so, I would say, for most people than
Mhm.
the increased stamina. But if you feel good working out and you're seeing the results, of those efforts, it's certainly a good draw as well. But the
Yeah.
fat loss is really key for clen as a drug of choice. Now, because it's not a steroid, you also get to observe those kinds of outcomes without all the male or the
Mhm.
masculinizing effects that you might see with a steroid.
Okay. So, I mean, I guess what you're saying is, if it's not, you can't prescribe it, right? It's not approved by the FDA here in the US.
In the US,
So
right?
either people are ordering it on the black market
Yeah.
online overseas, or I guess they could essentially be taking the veterinary drug
Yeah.
to get some of these effects.
Right.
So, but I mean, a lot of it sounds positive, right? You can train longer, you can train harder, I can recover faster. It's burning fat. Like, all of this stuff sounds really, really good. But what are some of the, with anything in life, right? There's always a downside,
Right.
right? And you try to, especially when we're dealing with young people, and I'm hoping, especially some of the young girls that are watching this, right? All this sounds great. Like, so what do I have to worry about? Can we talk about some of the downsides to these drugs, and maybe, obviously, there's a reason the FDA has not approved these drugs for use in humans.
Yeah, so the side effects are very significant, with this drug, and
Sure.
as we go into the others, they are as well. But most of the side effects will impact the respiratory system or cardiovascular system. So you probably get some hypertension, maybe heart rate irregularities, anxiety, even, tremors, stuff like this. And it may even on the surface sound like that would be relatively benign, but these can be very serious effects. You don't mess around with your cardiovascular
No.
system. You could enhance your susceptibility to stroke or, heart attack. And these could either be fatal or life changing, in their long term effect.
Are these drugs addictive from the sense that, I know there's the psychological addiction, right? Where I feel great, I look great, I need to continue the use of these drugs. Or is there also sort of that physiological where your body just feels like it needs it all the time, or I guess it gets used to it, so you need to use more? Can you kind of talk to that?
Yeah, so psychologically, it's funny you should bring up psychological because there's actually a side effect as well that I forgot to mention, that people can experience psychiatric disorders from clenbuterol specifically. So things like manic episodes, highs and lows, also depression. So that mechanism of action as to why they experience that is not well researched as far as I know, but it is a very real side effect that some people experience. The physical aspects of what you can achieve on this drug that I described can be a bit addictive, right? So you start to see, positive physical results, and people don't want to withdraw for those reasons. They want to keep getting lean, or they want to maintain that leanness, or they want to, feel better in the gym and their workouts. That's a really hard thing to give up once you start, experiencing it.
So is this like okay, so I guess let's talk first, because it's not approved by the FDA, right? So if you were getting this, let's say from a vet, let's start there. Is this going to be an injectable drug or a pill or a cream?
Yeah, most of the delivery systems are injectable.
Okay.
Simply because that's the best bioavailability you're going to get for the medication.
Okay. Interesting. So, I mean, obviously that's something we need to be, weary about, and people need to be aware about if, somebody's promising you, especially, and I don't know, you would probably know better than me, but, in like the female world and the influencer world, and again, just look at this on YouTube and you can go down rabbit hole for hours and hours and hours on these videos. Is it something where it's like these drugs are easy to get? Like I'm just trying to figure out. I guess it might be like anabolic steroids where people can just go out and, if you're in the gym and you have these competitors who are competing, especially for like pro status and that sort of thing that are using these drugs, there's got to be, I guess, ease of access with them as well.
Yeah, what is called the designer drug market for fitness purposes is relatively easy to access no matter who you are. Like you mentioned, you can get them on the web, and you can get them from, basically unregulated sources. You can get them from the guy in the alley by your gym, like kids have access to this. People have access, unfortunately. But, some of the dangers, we talked about side effects, but some of the dangers of accessing it without medical supervision, without that regulatory layer that most drugs should have, all drugs have, or supplements for that matter, you have an inherent risk aside from the side effects. They could be contaminated. They could not be what they say they are, which introduces other risks that you might not even be aware of, and then they're unavoidable.
I just find it interesting because let's say I didn't know you. We were working out at the gym together. Man, I got a headache. I just randomly offered you, which is a Aleve or Tylenol in my hand. And I hand it to you. I'm probably not going to take that.
Right.
And I just find that interesting because, again, you don't know me.
Right.
And this is legitimate Tylenol. I just had it in my pocket for some weird reason, right? Just for the analogy of the story. But then you have people that go out, they buy these drugs online or from somebody, and they have no idea where the drugs are coming in. Coming from, like you said, you have no idea what's actually in the drugs, and then we're injecting them into our body. So it's sort of, like we believe everything just starts with education. And, if there's ever a time in your life, I guess, when you might feel the pressure to use these or somebody's talking with you and about all the great benefits of Clenbuterol, you just need to think to yourself, I need to make an educated decision before moving forward. And that's the sad part is, especially in middle schools and high schools, I mean, this just is not covered in health class, but with the access to information, growing up, we didn't have phones and instant access to the information and video and a lot of influence out there. It's just important for people to listen to folks like you that, number one, take care of yourself, but two, have a knowledge about these drugs and how they work and some of the perils. So hopefully people can start making more educated decisions.
One thing that strikes me, and this became really evident because I had, my nephews are grown now, but they were young, when I was an adult, and they were in school, and they were both athletes, and they were starting to explore, the possibility of introducing, performance enhancing substances for athletic performance, and because they wanted to look, better and stuff. And they just don't have any concept of consequence, right? And I was talking to one of my nephews, and he was like, but they're really not that dangerous. And it was almost like everything I said, simply because I was an adult and I was telling him not to, maybe even made it more enticing. Kids, they're like, you can't tell me what to do, So it's a careful line that we walk, I think, to educate but not like, finger wag at them in a way
Yeah.
that they're like, you're just saying that, because you're an adult, you don't
Yeah.
understand, it's not that bad, it's just your duty to tell me. And they kind of
Yeah.
get in this mindset that it almost entices them to
Yeah.
try,
Yeah. It's
that,
like, don't question my intelligence. I did
yeah,
my research.
yeah,
Because Doc, so we had gotten questions previous from a lot of middle school and high school kids, talking about, I hear Tren is safe. And when they were asking me, I was like, you certainly can't be talking about trenbolone, but that's what they were.
yeah,
And that's when we sort of discovered that we ended up having a doctor and stuff on, and somebody that was, former bodybuilder and still in the fitness industry, talking about sort of the drugs and the side effects,
yeah,
which is why I'm glad we're talking about this, because there's always two sides to every story.
yeah,
And you just hope that people at least seek the information, to find out, like your nephew says, oh, they're safe. Well, sure. I
yeah,
mean, you could find any website out there to say that Clenbuterol is safe and Anavar is safe and all this sort of stuff is safe.
right.
But again, you can also go out there and find where there's side effects. There's medical literature on it. So
Well,
I do want to talk about
yeah.
Anavar. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, you opened up this conversation by saying that the use of these substances is all over the map,
Oh yeah.
right? So the experiences that an individual is going to have with these substances is also all over the map.
Yeah.
There may be someone who's lucky enough to try small doses or, even expand their dosing and look relatively healthy as far as anyone else
Yep.
is concerned, right? They may develop something and not talk about it.
Yeah.
It can be extremely shameful to realize that, you've made a mistake, and now
Mhm.
you have to talk about that or you have to undo that, right? So, what people perceive and what is reality, is
Yeah.
very skewed and widely varied,
Yeah.
so one person may have that experience and another person may have a really awful
Yeah.
experience, so it's just about what it's exposed to.
Yeah. We interviewed Ron Harris, who's a former bodybuilder, on the podcast a couple
Yeah.
episodes back. And that was sort of his thing. He's like, I got really lucky with a lot of the different drugs I was using. Yet guys that I worked out with in the gym, some of them aren't here
Yeah.
anymore with us. They've since passed on. They've gotten very sick. They've got issues with their cardiovascular system.
Right.
So it's, we're all different. We come from different backgrounds. We've got different genetics, different cultures. So, the drugs affect all of us differently. It's kind of
Right.
like, people are like, oh, well, I smoked cigarettes my whole life and I'm fine.
Yeah.
Well, that's not the case for everybody. And I think that's what you were saying, is it's the same with these drugs. While some people, especially at the gym, like, oh, I've taken Clen for 5 years. I feel great. Look at me,
Yeah.
where, there's some people out there that might not be forthcoming and saying, hey, I've also experienced some side effects, or because I use this drug, I now have the things in life I've got to continue dealing with because, it's affected my health.
And they may not talk about that either. So even if they are experiencing that, like I said, it can be very shameful to talk about that you experimented with, illegal drugs, or illicit, drug use essentially, and, experience some sort of side effects, especially for females. And we'll get into that,
Yeah.
they can be much more embarrassing than what men
Yes.
experience as a result.
So are you seeing, because you've been in this industry for a long time, are you noticing that there is an uptick in the discussion about these drugs? People are more open, whether male, female, whether they're on testosterone or whether they're on some of these drugs that we're talking about today. Are you also seeing that sort of within, the fitness and bodybuilding industry, that people are now more open to talk about it, where, I mean, even 10 or 15 years ago, it was very secretive.
Yeah.
I got this body naturally. I'm natty, right? Even though
Yeah.
I'm on like low dose of testosterone.
Well, don't get me started on the natty topic because what some people think is natty is naughty.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And
That was a bad joke. Anyway,
no, but more people are talking, right? But no, but it's true. And that's what I want these young people to see, is there's this discussion that's happening now, maybe thanks to social media,
yeah.
that wasn't happening 10, 15, even 20 years ago.
Well, I think what I'm seeing is two, extreme spectrums.
Mhm.
First of all, there is almost like an unspoken acceptance of these drugs and like an expectation that
Yeah.
essentially you could not expect to reach a certain level of physical fitness and appearance without them, especially in these non-sanctioned non-tested
Yeah.
competitive environments where the expectation for meeting certain criteria on stage is just unlike most people would achieve naturally,
Yeah.
right? So the expectation for these competitors is that they're willing to take that risk to achieve these
Yeah.
results. And basically, their audience understands that.
Mhm.
And they're basically saying, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay to take these risks because I'm willing to take those risks for that benefit that I'm experiencing,
Yeah.
right? And that has been critical, I think, in kind of upticking the usage of
Mhm.
these drugs and getting them more publicized out there with skewed information or misinformation
Mhm.
that only puts forward the positives, like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, I saw that person on Muscle and Fitness or
Yep.
Ironman magazine or whatever, it is nowadays. Read them nowadays, but I saw them essentially glamorized and publicized in a way that is very attractive to
Yep.
me as an audience, right?
Yeah.
So that's happening more than ever.
Yep.
And so on one side of the fence, it's pretty much accepted.
Yeah, and it's all glamorized, right? It's like social media. It's like, it's not your real life. People people aren't going to put the bad times you have. You got pictures of your family and the
Right.
great food you're eating, but
Right.
not
And
the
you work,
struggles that are happening, right?
yeah.
Between the four walls of your home. And, one of the things that I think is kind of flying under the radar is you're seeing a lot of influencers, fitness people, bodybuilders, they're dying at
Yeah.
young ages.
Yeah. I mean, like
Massive
Ronnie
cardio, right?
Coleman, have you, I
Yeah.
mean, 6-time, I think, Mr. Olympia.
Yeah.
Seen him lately. I mean,
Yeah. He's
he's
in a
a,
wheelchair.
yeah, yeah,
So but I guess too, for young people, and we were both there at one time, it's like you feel invisible. Like, oh,
yeah,
I'm just going to do it now while, it's hip and my body, and sure, your body's younger. It can handle a lot of that stuff, but it's hard, I think. And I don't know how I think if you could solve this, you would never have to work another day in your life. But how do you give perspective to a young person to show them in life that there's more to life than your teens and your 20s?
yeah,
Like my dad always told me, once you have kids, your perspective on everything will change.
sure, sure.
And, I now look back on that. I'm like, yeah, it certainly does.
Well, you have
Because before
obligation,
kids, oh, I'd never
yeah,
do that. Right. But
and you're
now,
obligated to somebody. You're never
yeah,
responsible for anyone other than yourself, and you can make
yeah,
judgment calls without any, with relatively low consequence, other than
yeah,
what you experience. So you're absolutely right in that. But again, people are a little bit, I mean, this is the age of information, has been for the last 20 years. People are more open about talking about these topics, but they still think they're very selective about how they talk about the topics.
y-
And by far, the influence on the audience is that these, are potentially acceptable, and the negative outcomes of this are far less talked about than they should be.
yeah. And that's why I think it's just so important that regardless of how many views this
Mhm.
video gets or how many audio downloads this gets, if it just reaches that one person
Yeah,
that's out there looking, this high school girl that's just begging for information, that can listen to somebody like you share their experience, their knowledge about these drugs, that, sure, there's a lot of, I mean, you can't lie to them, right? There's a lot of benefits to the
yeah,
drugs. They work. That's why people obviously use them.
yeah,
But there's also a reason, like, for instance, like with Clenbuterol, that the FDA hasn't approved it. And, for use in humans, and people are having to buy this stuff on the black market, or, veterinary type drugs. And
yeah,
that's why I want to shift gears over to another drug that's been talked about. It's Anavar, or I've seen people mention it as VAR.
yeah,
And that was one of the other deep dives I went into on social media. Females, Anavar, boom, millions of hits. And there's lots of information out there.
yeah.
And so I bet, again, it's super important to have somebody like you on here to kind of, what are these drugs? What do people refer to these drugs? Sort of the same thing we did with Clenbuterol. So I'll kind of kick it back to you to talk about Anavar.
Yeah, Anavar, man, this one's been popular for I mean, both of them have been popular for such
Yeah.
a long time. Also, the reason for their prevalence, right? There's a
Mm.
lot to draw from over, the last several decades. But Anavar is actually an anabolic steroid.
Mm.
So it's different from Clen in that it does cause androgenic effects directly.
Okay.
So increasing testosterone and other androgenic hormones. And as most people know, that's going to be that's going to masculinize the user, right? So
Yep.
females, what this means, unfortunately, is, I mean, and people kind of laugh at this side effect, unfortunately, but some hair growth, some voice
Yep.
changes and stuff like that. And even with those things, there's still a lot of people are still willing to take those risks,
Yeah. Oh,
right?
yeah.
But then because it's a steroid, it has a tremendous amount of potential serious side effects, internally, such as liver failure or liver cancer, potentially fatal conditions, that you can't escape and that are undeniably, a larger risk than just looking better. So I think people don't understand that because the masculinizing effects of the drug are sometimes a little less than other anabolic
Yeah.
steroids. So females gravitate towards it because they're like, well, I might get a little hair growth, but I'm not going to be, like
Yeah.
full beard
Yeah.
in the next month or so. I can deal with that. Or
Yeah.
voice might change a little. I'll just say I'm sick. And I've witnessed this firsthand, oh, I just have a little hoarseness. I just have a cold. They're always making excuses
Mhm.
as to why this is okay. But then
Mhm.
once it starts affecting your physiological health and bringing on serious side effects, that's when people, usually change their tune a bit.
So from like the drug aspect, kind of like we talked about clenbuterol, like, is there any medical need that somebody would need? Like you'd walk into your doctor and, hey, I'm sick or whatever. Like, oh yeah, we'll give you a prescription for Anavar.
Yeah, so very limited uses
Okay.
clinically, right?
Yeah.
And it wouldn't necessarily be drug of choice unless you had some pretty extreme circumstances. It is legal to prescribe it in the US, but usually because you've been
Okay.
critically ill, you've had some sort of extensive trauma,
Yeah.
you've had some, what they call muscle wasting or,
Mhm.
anabolic effects of a long-term illness, right? You're looking to maintain muscle, the muscle that you have, or perhaps put some more weight on.
Mhm.
So in patients like this, it might be a drug of choice, but again, under very strict supervision and under
Yeah.
very extreme circumstances.
Okay. So I guess from like a female standpoint, if you're competing in bodybuilding, right, and you're looking to get pro, yeah, I'll say it, you have to use drugs, right, if you want to win at that level. I mean, because you take a look at some of the physiques, like you go back to like the early '80s with Rachel McClish, right, and in our programs we'll show, the early Miss Olympia and what her physique looked like compared to today,
Yeah.
2023, 2024. And I'm guessing at that level, if you want to compete, these are the types, like an Anavar is one you would have to use to develop some of that larger muscle. And I'm sure there's other types of drugs that
Oh, for sure.
females are using in competition, maybe to get a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
Because you had talked about some of the anabolic effect and, that Anavar takes place. But is Anavar going to be a type of drug like, you compare it to like a Trenbolone, right? Like the monster steroid, right? That's going to cause muscles to just explode in growth.
Yeah.
But is that why a female would want to use it in this? And Stephanie kind of talking about the fitness world versus bodybuilding and the different physiques. Like, why would some females want to use this type of drug for competition? Like, what would be the gain to it?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're certainly going to likely experience muscle growth. I mean, a lot of that goes into your diet and the time and intensity you spend in the gym.
Yeah,
You
still got
don't
to
just
train.
magically take it,
Yeah, yeah,
and explode with muscles. You do need to put in the work. But again, it's perceived that it has less risks, especially from a visual perspective. So I think Stephanie talked about this too. There are different divisions in female bodybuilding
yes,
nowadays, and some divisions, like the one that I compete in, is figure, and I think she did too,
yep,
actually. And figure, the criteria is different than a female bodybuilder.
okay,
You need to be muscular, you need to be conditioned, you need to be symmetrical, but almost to a smaller degree, a smaller scale
uh-huh.
than compared to the physique and bodybuilding competitor,
Okay,
female bodybuilding competitor. Same as for men's divisions,
mhm.
although the line is blurred much more with those
Yeah,
divisions than for females. But, I always describe what I compete in as kind of like a pageant, with muscles,
yeah,
really pageant muscles, because you still want to maintain that femininity, but just, to a larger degree than you would see in general beauty pageant. So when they think of Anavar, they think I can achieve that muscularity, that conditioning that I'm looking for these various degrees of more feminine side of
mhm.
bodybuilding and not experience, more of the drastic effects that I would with like trend, right?
Okay,
And at the same time, they often couple this with cleanse to achieve that extreme fat loss that is still necessary in each of those divisions.
Okay. So, I mean, both drugs would sound very tempting to somebody that just knew. I mean, let's call them, I mean, in their eyes, positive effects. I'm losing weight. I can exercise more. I feel good. I'm gaining muscle. My body's changing the way it wants. So it's something like from you, who's been, a natural, clean athlete. You've had to, at some point, I guess, felt pressure to use these drugs, right? I mean, like I'm thinking about some of these girls that they're working out in high school, whether they're participating in sports or not. Fitness is becoming more and more popular, which is great.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong there. But I mean, I think that's where some of these drugs are starting to get introduced. From your perspective as a female that has been a lifelong athlete like this, I mean, was that ever presented to you? Did you ever think to yourself like, oh man, I might want to get on this stuff?
Oh, for sure. And, I would be lying if I didn't say those thoughts didn't still enter my mind. I would never choose it because I know that, the risks,
Yeah.
just ethically, I just don't think it's right.
Yeah.
Not only being a healthcare provider and having to walk that walk, and talk,
Yeah.
but just, I don't think it's fair sport. I started out in the untested organization, so the NPC,
Yep.
and actually went quite far as a natural athlete, because even then I wasn't using anything. I've never used
Uh-huh.
anything. And I got to national level, and then of course I got annihilated on the stage at national level as a natural athlete. But it's very defeating. We
Yeah.
talked about all the work, all the sacrifice, all the effort. Not just you sacrificing, but everyone around you
Yeah.
sacrificing to make this happen, and in more cases than not. And it's so defeating to get on a stage where you're like, oh my gosh,
You can immediately
everybody,
tell.
one of these kids is doing their own thing. Like
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
can tell that,
Yeah.
you are the anomaly, in that group. And, as hard as you worked and as proud as you feel of your personal results, it's, you don't get the reward for that on stage. You don't get that public recognition of
Yeah.
you achieving something great, not only something healthy for yourself, but something basically above and beyond what most people walking around will ever achieve, right?
Yeah.
Whether they're using
Yeah.
drugs or not,
Yeah.
you have raised that bar, and to not be able to embrace that, and
Yeah.
celebrate that is really defeating. And that's when I talked about the psychological component, that could drive someone to use, drugs, of course, but it also reinforces that, your own personal accomplishments aren't important.
Yeah.
And that is a psychological hurdle, I would say, that most people that stay in competition struggle with.
Mm.
They can say, oh, I'm super strong. It's all about me and beating my former self and raising my bar. It's true, but you would have to constantly remind yourself of that,
Mm.
because if you enter into an arena where that is clearly not somebody's approach,
Yep.
or that's the majority's, that's not their approach, then it can be very difficult to maintain.
Yeah, and that's why I think this important, this conversation is so important because we're just hoping, especially as we're delivering programs in schools and you get a question, let's say high school girl comes up, hey, I'm thinking about, getting on Clen or VAR or whatever, and
Yeah.
I'm hearing more about it. We can point them to this podcast
Yeah.
and, again, just from your side as a doctor, but also somebody that's been in the fitness and bodybuilding industry a long time.
Yeah.
So, that's super important. And, the last thing I had here is just as a doctor, as well as somebody that takes care of their body, what message would you want to share directly to these young females who might be interested in learning more about either taking a step forward to use these drugs or just, hey, I'd like to just hear kind of both sides of the story for a minute?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would encourage people to get an informed opinion
Yeah.
about these drugs. Don't use social media. I mean, again, kids are going to be like, yeah, whatever,
Yeah.
don't tell me to look.
Yeah.
But really, try to get an expert, try to get somebody that's well informed on both sides, that has they have no skin in the game for telling you one way or the other, other than to educate you
Mm.
about this topic. It's extremely important because you don't know what you don't know. And that's true for adults. as well as kids. So this isn't an age thing or, telling people that they don't know better.
Yeah.
It really is just true throughout our lives, so get good information. Understand what you want to achieve. Like, what is it you really want to achieve? Is it just a physical effect? Because if that's the case, you don't need to take drugs. So
Mhm.
educate yourself on a healthy way to achieve that. Also educate them to the expense and the risks that are involved if you're going to get involved in this stuff. So I would encourage them not to. But if you absolutely feel like you need to get into this, know that you are legally susceptible,
Yeah. Yeah.
to different risks. You are physically susceptible to different risks, for your health, not only things that could, make you ill
Mm.
or even change your appearance in a way that you weren't looking to do, making you look more masculine or, things that you can't hide
Mm.
eventually. But also, it's expensive. So do you have the
It's
affordability
yeah.
to even get into this habit? Do you have the maintenance protocol to be able to even, continue with this habit to achieve those results?
Yeah.
Or are you going to start to dive into this and get nothing in return and only the negative side effects, or impact as a result? So just inform yourself. Know that quite often or more often than not, the benefits do not outweigh the risks.
Yeah.
You are more than likely to experience, physiological, health impact and negative impact in the relatively short term, so months and months after use or a couple of cycles after use that, you would not experience if you just took, the natural approach.
Yeah.
And it's possible to achieve those results through a natural approach that, there are a lot of living proof, of taking natural approaches to strength and fitness and, physical aesthetics,
Mm.
not. And always know that you're subject to what people put out there.
Yeah.
For example, I'm not going to name names, of the most, prominent, female
Yeah.
fitness influencers right now, because I don't want to put judgment out there because whatever
Yep.
people's choices are at the end of the
Yep.
day is their choice. But know that you are getting more likely than not the most positive aspect of their experience, the most
Exactly.
glamorous aspect of their experience. And they're not typically going to talk about how or if they were harmed, by this
Yeah.
experience in any way because it's not good for their brand, or the brands that they represent, personally or professionally.
Yeah. And I knew when, again, like I was saying, you and Stephanie were like unicorns. For a long time, we were looking just for the perfect, strong female, knowledgeable, influencers like that could talk educatedly about this topic from an experience side, from a medical side.
Yeah.
I'll just never, be able to thank Lisa enough for connecting us because this has just been tremendous. And I know there's going to be a lot of young girls that get a lot a lot out of this. Now, I know you have tuned into our podcast before. You said you had watched Stephanie's podcast.
Yeah.
So as we end every podcast, we have what we call our curveball round. So
Great.
these have nothing to do with your schooling. These are kind of fun icebreaker questions that we always like to end our podcast with. And so what I'm going to do is I have 3 questions prepared for you. And what I'll do is I'm going to read these questions, and just the first thing that pops into your mind is how you'll respond to it. You let me know when you're ready, and I'll read the first question.
My gosh, how can I be ready?
That's kind of the whole point, right?
So I guess I'm ready.
All right. So here is the first one. What is the best thing that you've ever crossed off your bucket list?
The best thing?
The best thing.
Oh my
You
gosh,
jumped
this
out of
is
an
so
airplane.
ironic. This is ironic based on the discussion, and I didn't prepare this in my mind, but I competed a couple of years ago at the amateur NPC Olympia.
Okay.
So, and that sounds ironic because I'm a natural competitor, and going into that, you wouldn't place, you would be annihilated again.
Yeah.
But I wanted to do that with the mindset that I was truly competing against me and bring my best physique ever, 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 ever in the 20 plus years that I've been doing this. And I did that. And I truly walked away with a sense of empowerment, a sense of accomplishment. I was pleased, physically, but even more than that, I went in with a healthy mindset, and my family got to experience that with me too. It
That's
wasn't
cool.
this, totally defeating episode of competition that they've witnessed so many times
Yeah,
over the year, even on a natural stage, that it was just really a good experience. And I was able to just
that's
take in
awesome.
the positive and none of the negative of that whole environment that can so often weigh down on you, leading up to and in the show experience. So that was a huge bucket list for me, not only to compete on that stage, which, props
But
to
you got there.
and IFBB is a huge
Yeah,
competitive stage. So to come in feeling good about me, I looked great. I
yeah,
just looked different, than a lot of actors. So feeling good about me was a huge bucket list item and kind of some closure after all
yeah.
these years and gave me even more momentum moving forward, as I continue to do this approaching my 50s.
Well, good. No, that's awesome. That's awesome. So here's the second question.
Okay.
What is your favorite way to waste time? I know you're busy. You're like me. It sounds like my parents never had to tell me to get up and do something. I'm constantly, my wife's like, you're always wired, even on like 3 hours of sleep. So how do you waste your time?
Can I tell you two ways? Because there's
Yeah.
two ways I find myself wasting time or getting distracted. One is crime dramas, you know,
Okay.
like
I like true crime
As
podcasts. Yeah.
random as that.
Yep.
In order,
I'm a true crime person. Yeah.
because they've got that medical side to them.
Yeah.
They've also got, the very interesting, criminal side. And I love that.
Mhm.
In fact, I would have been an attorney if I had my way, with all the education. So it
Yeah.
kind of appeals to me. But the other thing is words with friends, so geeky. But my husband and I love Scrabble, but we seldom
Okay.
have the time and space to sit down to old fashioned Scrabble game. So we play words with friends, and we're
I
very
remember that game.
we're nerds and we're very competitive. Words with friends, like I'll get a ping at like 4 o'clock in the morning. I'll be like, "Don't answer that, Chris. You're not gonna."
Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty cool. But those are good things though, right?
I,
So, yeah, so my final question for you. Would you rather have to sing everything you say or dance every time you move?
well, that's a hard one because I love
I know
both.
I saw that. I was like, this is a good one. This is a good one.
Love both. I mean, many people don't know that before I got into health and nutrition from an educational standpoint, I was a theater major. So
So you can do both. You can do both.
I can do both. I mean, people get awfully tired of me really soon, but I
Yeah,
want to do both.
that's
And,
pretty cool. Yeah.
like competing is kind of an outlet for that, so
Yeah.
it didn't go into entertainment as a being on stage and being almost like a different personality that's different than my professional life. It's like an alter ego. It's quite satisfying, for me to have that outlet.
Yeah, it's like, but could you imagine if like we're both singing to each other throughout the podcast? That's where my brain was like, I've got to ask somebody this question. So you were kind of my first victim, and we try to mix it up on each one. So I thank you for dealing with me on the curveball round today. It's always just kind of fun, just a fun way to kind of wrap up a podcast.
Yeah.
And I did want to just thank you again. I know this is such an important topic, and we just weren't going to settle for just anyone. Like we had talked previously to the recording, we had a lot of males
Yeah.
that were very, very willing and open, which was wonderful to talk about these drugs.
Yeah.
And I think that's great. I'm married and I understand that the way females communicate with each other is different than male to female. And it was very important for us to find the right person that we could talk to about these drugs that would resonate with other females, especially you're kind of the unicorn because not only are you on that medical side and understand it, but you also compete, so you're around it. You understand the game, if you
Right.
will.
Yeah, and we only have so much time, and I joked about being able to talk about this all week. I feel like we covered a lot of ground,
We
but
did.
this is a very comprehensive topic, both from the psychological components, the peer pressure that people may experience, the medical side of things, the accessibility,
Yeah,
just all of these things together, there's really a lot of stones unturned. And so
there is.
honestly, I thank you for having me on because I couldn't talk
Yeah,
about this enough. And like you said, if we just reach one person, that would be great. But, I would jump on the chance of talking about this anytime because I really think that it's not an aspect of that side of fitness that's really explored, not only for young kids or, teenagers even, but especially for females. That's a very difficult road to navigate.
Yeah, and I'll be sure to put all this in the show notes, but how can people come follow you on social media if there's, a young girl like, hey, I want to see Dr. Kristy. I want to see her, competing or what she's doing for her workouts to, get ready for a competition or to stay in shape. How can they find you?
Well, hopefully you can post this somewhere,
Yep.
but it's a long one. It's a long
Oh,
handle on Instagram. It's Dr. Kristy Appelhans because
okay.
I'm such an old school person.
I will take what I'll do for you. Yeah, what I'll do for you is it's like my email address is so long, but I'll make sure I take that and put it in the show notes. So anybody that's watching this on YouTube or listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, they can just click it open and they can find you to, hopefully follow you and get some inspiration.
Yeah, and I do have a YouTube channel to that
Okay.
point. I try to be informational in my approach that, people could get the real experience. So in other words, if you see a video of me working out, I usually have an explanation as to why I'm doing that exercise and why it
Yep.
would be optimal compared to other exercises for that body part. So I try to give a lot of free information that's unbiased,
Awesome.
to my audience. But yeah, you can reach out to me through Instagram too.
Okay.
DMing and for people that want to work with me, I can always facilitate that. But there's
Excellent.
plenty of free advice, plenty of free
Yeah.
connection, for people who are interested. I've recently done TikTok, which is laughable because I'm so old. You know,
That's a different animal altogether.
if you want to see my ridiculous attempts at TikTok, they are there too, but they're still
We will be following you here in the next couple of minutes. We just had to start it. It's a whole different ballgame.
yeah, but I'm out there, the point being,
Yeah.
and that usually the way that I reach my audiences is no different on any of the platforms. It's just about
Yeah.
navigating the idiosyncrasies of those platforms. But the
Yeah.
information is usually consistent with health,
Yep.
fitness, safe, natural, approaches to health and fitness.
Yeah. Well, good. Again, Dr. Appelhans, thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful chatting with you this morning, and I know this is certainly going to impact some young female lives.
That's great to hear. Thank you so much for having me.